For more, I'm joined in studio now for the hour by Dan Barry, international affairs analyst, as well as the former Europe and Middle East editor for the Associated Press and the former chairman for the Foreign Press Association in Jerusalem, as well as security analyst Yaakov Lapin. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us on the rundown today. Now, Dan, as we just heard from our correspondent Robert Swift, although we have seen some scuffles, according to the police chief actually moments ago, speaking to some Israeli media, they said there hadn't been any arrests so far. Some people had been detained, but these disturbances are on the fringe of the fringe, especially compared to what we saw last year. The messaging coming out of the Flag March, it is supposed to be this joyful occasion, yet each year we have seen it marked with at least hateful sentiment coming from them, even if we're not seeing this violence perhaps this year. How could this change? What are we seeing as far as the Flag March?
This used to be a celebration of the reunification of Jerusalem, which I think most Israelis indeed want to celebrate. And it was infiltrated increasingly over the years by far-right movements that are openly anti-Arab and racist, and this grows throughout. I think it's rather sad that the authorities and the police tolerate this. I mean, the situation you had today, although mercifully it hasn't led to violence yet, did include, as we heard, very consistent and loud and prominent racist chants. There were signs up all over the city on Jewish property saying Jewish property such that it wouldn't be attacked. I don't know why it's tolerated, although I kind of do know, because the police in Israel is currently controlled by the political manifestation of these very same people, Itamar Ben-Gvir. So it's a disgrace. It clearly sullies what should be a day of genuine celebration and unity among Israelis. And by the way, the reunification of Jerusalem, it's not bad for Arabs. I mean, the Palestinian Arabs in East Jerusalem, polls have shown, prefer to be in Israel than in Palestine. And obviously, certainly in a material sense, but also in a political freedom sense, would offer them more. So I don't know why they would want to turn this issue, where Israel could have the moral high ground, into one that adds to what is a mounting disgrace.
The Jordanian Foreign Ministry accused Ben-Gvir of storming Al-Aqsa Mosque along with a large group of extremist settlers. Here's what Ben-Gvir had to say during his visit.
There are truly many Jews flooding the Temple Mount. How nice to see that. Today, thanks to God, it is possible to pray on the Temple Mount, to bow in prayer on the Temple Mount. We thank God for that. And we will continue. We are here in prayer for the safety of the hostages, that they all return home safely, for victory in the war.
Now, coming back here in studio, the Jews, they're not officially allowed to pray at the Temple Mount, but police under Ben-Gvir's ministry, they have become more tolerant, it seems, recently with allowing something like this to happen. Is it likely that we're going to see a shift in status quo? This is something Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continues to deny, but we're seeing, it seems, firsthand, possibly that shift, Dan.
Well, there are strong arguments for allowing Jews to pray on Temple Mount, or to be on Temple Mount. Same as anyone is allowed to be at the Western Wall Plaza. There's something of an absurdity in the ban, and it sort of hails from an extreme interpretation of the Jewish religion. So there's a pretense that somehow it's a pro-Jewish policy because it's Judaism that prevents it. It's nonsensical. But on the other hand, it is hugely sensitive. If there's one thing that can inflame the Muslim world, it's changes in the status quo. I would welcome a change, but in the context of a broader change that brings about diplomatic progress and peace. That's hardly what we're seeing. So when Israel currently is at such violent and dramatic loggerheads with the Palestinians, I think the last thing it needs is another provocation. And there's no doubt in my mind that it's intended as a provocation. There was at least one instance in history where a lesser provocation by a far more reasonable and it turned out a temporary right-winger, Ariel Sharon, actually helped spark violence that bloomed into the Second Intifada. This is obviously during his visit in 2000, September 2000. Thankfully, Ben-Gvir isn't succeeding in doing that, and I realize I'm saying something terrible when I assess that he would like to. I think if the result of this was mayhem and chaos, that would serve him politically, and he's just about cynical enough to desire that outcome.
Muslims have access to the Temple Mount. They go up there and pray. So this fine balancing act between coming down very hard on the sort of jihadist fuel that always seeks to use this site to inflame escalation, that is taking a hammering in the Gaza Strip together with maintaining a status quo, I think is helping to keep the situation under relative control, at least as of now. And we're not seeing the kind of violence that we've seen around this site in past years because of that confluence of factors.
By the way, I think we need to also note that Muslims don't have free control to the Temple Mount area. I mean, young Muslims frequently are barred from it. In general, there's an attempt to lower the flames through an optimum of keeping away people who could cause trouble while allowing enough people in from all sides, including Jews, as we've seen on occasion, to somehow satisfy all sides. And it usually works happily, and sometimes it does not.
Netanyahu saying today that either today or tomorrow they're going to be good news, or they hope that there will be good news for the release of the hostages. Now we understand, and this is according to an Israeli official, that this was not talking about some specific thing. Rather, that was a general statement about the efforts that the government is taking to bring back the hostages as soon as possible. And families of hostages are now demanding clarification from the Prime Minister, and they are saying, we feel that they are, we feel that we are being tortured. Every statement like this makes our broken heart skip a beat. That's what families of hostages has said. Some even called it some psychological warfare.
Dan, I want your reaction just on these statements that we heard from the Prime Minister himself, addressing these swirling reports, but not actually really giving any answers of what's to come.
It boggles the mind that Netanyahu would play with the feelings of the hostage families this way. You know, there's a great movie 50 years ago, a Western called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and one of the finest lines in that film was, if you're going to shoot, shoot, don't talk. Why on earth? He would try to, anticipate by 24 hours, if we're to believe him, an announcement that would have not been ridiculous and would have been joyful had he made it tomorrow. And now it turns out to perhaps not even be based on anything. Is yet another sign, I fear, of how everything to come from that quarter is basically PR. But I think this was a PR miscalculation. More important is I agree with the report. The change in the nature of the humanitarian aid delivery does have potential to weaken Hamas to the point where maybe something might finally change, because they would, if it works, no longer be able to exercise patronage through the distribution of aid after they've hijacked much and probably most of it. And maybe then the population might finally turn against them in a more convincing fashion. And we see that in the efforts of Hamas to prevent the people from going to the station that was open today, and presumably that will continue when more distribution centers will be open in coming days. Think of it. I mean, you can bash on the government of Israel all you want, and they have given us good reason, but Hamas is by magnitude so much more awful. They're literally telling their people to not go collect the aid while at the same time claiming their people are starving. I mean, I don't know how anyone on the planet can be clueless or evil enough to support these people.
The IDF is committed to eliminating the dependence of Gaza civilians on Hamas for that humanitarian aid. So time is definitely working against Hamas. Is that going to push them into a deal? We don't know. I've long urged everyone not to try and get into the head of jihadists. I don't think it's possible. We'll have to find out soon enough.
A headspace I would not want to be in, that's for sure. Dan, I want your thoughts.
Yeah, I think we finally have discovered some daylight between myself and my friend Yaakov. I'm skeptical about this idea that they're going to lose land and will never withdraw, because they're going to withdraw. Gaza is so small; it's such an it's so suboptimal for Israel to try to keep any of it with so many Palestinians there. That I think all it really means is they won't withdraw as quickly, which relates to my second point of skepticism. This idea that Israel is going to now, in the next 2 months, occupy 75% of Gaza is almost absurd. It's a tiny amount of territory, and Israel should have overrun it in 75 hours, rather in 19 hours, not 19 months, with 2 more to go. I mean, it's the fact that it's proving so difficult, and that we're still only talking at 75%. And what that really means is we'll take it over and then not leave, and while Hamas is in power. The fact that it's still at that level, instead of the total victory that Netanyahu said was imminent in March of 2024 illustrates the fundamental central contradiction of the entire strategy here, which is that you cannot go in there and really obliterate this group, and they're holding the hostages without killing the hostages. And so what we have here is a paradigm that many of us predicted would lead to a forever war when the government would have denied that this will take 2 years in running, but simply has. And right now, Yaakov says, well, time is not serving Hamas, but many people in Israel, and I do believe a majority would say, time is not serving Israel if your priority is to rescue the hostages. And I cannot tell you for sure that this is the wrong decision because it's a complex equation. But the government of Israel, which had a deal on the table that they were compelled to sign by Trump, by now would have ended the war and received back all the hostages. But it would have looked like a bit of a surrender to Hamas, because despite the devastation and the punishment, they would have remained in power. Now they're gambling that by doing more of the same, but maybe passing a certain threshold, finally this will work. It might not, but this endangers the hostages to a degree that I think most people in Israel don't want.
I think, any expectation, wherever it comes from, anybody who encourages the idea that we can quickly take Gaza, that we're still in some sort of 6-day war era, those times have passed in the kind of enemy that Israel is facing, this entrenched enemy that uses every building, hospital, mosque, and humanitarian facility as a base of attack, as a command post. This is going to take several more months at least, and the goal, as far as I understand it from Israel, is to bring the threat level down at least to where it can be compared to what Israel is facing in the West Bank in terms of terrorism threats, no mass tunnel threats, no mass rocket threats, no organized formations. Yes, there is a severe threat, but it's ultimately manageable. I think that's the real goal here, even if it's not being stated publicly.
Dan, you have some ideas as far as alternatives to what we're seeing inside Gaza right now.
Yeah,
what are you thinking?
I mean, I again agree with Yaakov that the strategy currently being promoted is basically a forever war. It won't take 2 months and it won't take 10 months. It will lead to a military administration and an insurgency, and Israel will be hoping to minimize the Hamas threat by eliminating its most vile capabilities. I think there's a far, far better way. For too long, Israel has prosecuted this war without regard to strategy and almost purely tactics. One of the reasons why, if Israel pulled out tomorrow, which again Israel had agreed to do in January, it leaves Hamas degraded and diminished, somehow still in power, is because Israel itself has prevented the creation of an alternative to Hamas. Now, it's also true when government spokespeople say, well, no alternative will go in as long as Hamas is still there. Hamas has been vastly degraded, and there is a potential alternative reality on the table that, for all I know, Trump is preparing to introduce in his unpredictable way at some point in the near future, which would involve Israel agreeing to some rejuvenated and reformed version of the PA with massive Arab backing to take over Gaza and to bring in such colossal economic and security assistance that Hamas would be isolated in its refusal. And at that point, when Hamas is presented in the entire Arab world as the enemy of ending the war and of a pretty promising new horizon, especially given the military aid that is pretty much ready to come from the Gulf countries, pressure will mount on it to relent somehow. Now, one of the reasons Hamas is refusing to give in to Israel's demands is because they don't want to look like they lost the war. Why don't they want to look like they lost the war? Because despite being terrorists who don't really care about the deaths of their own people, they do care about their standing in Palestinian society, where they, for example, in the West Bank, which hasn't suffered the brunt of their rule, still have some support. Now, it's hard for me to envision that the pressure on Hamas to find a way to essentially give in would not be of a wholly different level if Israel agreed to say these words: yes, we will consider what was just said. Yes, we will look at an alternative government. And yes, we're not intending to take over any 75% of this anyway tiny territory. We just want Hamas gone, maybe through the exile of its remaining leadership. The fact that Israel doesn't do this largely because the far right would bring down the government is idiotic on every level, because I have no doubt the opposition would give Netanyahu a 9 to 12 month umbrella to do it anyway. And by the way, the moment is right for this, because under certain circumstances, I'm not promising this, but there's such desperation in the world to end the war, in the region to end the war, that some version of normalization with Saudi Arabia is in the offing, but not only that, one can envision an accommodation with Syria and Lebanon to throw all this away because of tactical concerns that I know the majority of the past and probably current leadership of the military in Israel, not to mention the Mossad and the Shin Bet, oppose is madness.
All right, interesting alternative to what we are seeing inside Gaza right now.
I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all, okay? We're in the middle of talking, and he's shooting rockets into Kiev and other cities. I don't like it at all.
Mr. President, what do you want to do about
And
that?
I'm surprised. I'm very surprised. We'll see what we're going to do.
U.S. President is not happy there, as he continues to say. Well, still with me in studio, Dan Perry, Yaakov Levin. Dan, this is the largest drone assault since the war started. There's no signs of the war against Ukraine slowing down, but what do you make of Trump's statements, taking this now strong stance, perhaps, against Russian President Putin?
I don't tend to take literally Trump's statements that range in their connection to the truth from sometimes total to many times non-existent. Trump hates looking like a loser, and there are a few things that make him look like a loser more in the eyes of the American public than the appearance of his being completely in the pocket of Putin. So that he should lash out every now and then in public against Putin is no great surprise. He does go against type in that usually he's defending almost anything Putin does, and occasionally making outrageous comments like Ukraine started the war. I would be more impressed if Trump were putting serious pressure on Russia, like ratcheting up the sanctions, the indirect sanctions.
And there are reports that Trump is considering more sanctions on Russia.
Look, here's the problem. Trump thought he could end the war on day one by freezing the front lines and having Ukraine, in effect, cede the roughly 20% of the territory that it has lost in years of war. Putin is now insisting on Ukraine handing over land that Russia has annexed but hasn't yet actually captured. So this is not very sporting of Putin, and in general, I think Trump misunderstands that what Putin wants is not only territory, but also Ukraine that is completely neutered. Now, there are a lot of ideas about how to somehow round this circle and come up with a compromise, and clearly Trump is frustrated by the rendering ridiculous of his claim that he would end the war on day one.
Yaakov Levin and Dan Perry, thank you for bringing us your insight into everything that's happening these complicated days.